I'm welcoming in good friend of the program and of me, Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations and Research, board member also at Judicial Watch, at Judicial Watch on X. Thank you so much for coming on.
Stacy, it is wonderful to be with you. I'm really happy to spend some time chatting with you about corruption and various weirdness in America.
Right. So we'll just get this one out of the way because we have to discuss it, because what your organization does is you guys go out and you find corruption, and if you can't root it out, you sue. You drop the hammer of the law on these people. And usually once you drop that hammer, a win is imminent. Judicial Watch wins a lot, which is why you're such a huge organization and so successful at the work that you do. And so I saw this viral video, and I know you saw it as well. It's an illegal alien. He's in the country, and he's discovered that the squatter laws actually favor the thieves. So you have an empty house, maybe it's your rental property, and you have a couple of weeks where no one's in there renting it. And so the squatters will move in, change the locks, and when you come to throw them out, the police will arrest you, because anyone who's living someplace, I don't know where this law comes from, has, I guess, tenants' rights. And this isn't, the law varies across the country. In some places, squatters don't have any rights. In places like California, New York, they have tons of rights. So talk to us about like the details here.
The creepy thing is this guy, I think he has something like 300,000 followers, right? So he's out there communicating what's really a metaphor for Biden's America, which is break in and take over, right? That's the broad message. He's giving this example of doing crazy squatters' rights attempts to move in and take over houses. I saw an article not too long ago that had something like 1,200 homes in the Atlanta area where squatters have taken over. 1,200. That's a crazy number. But anyway, this guy, he looks like a punk. He looks like, he's a freaky looking dude. Anyway, he puts out this little viral video, and it's arrogant and it's just obnoxious to listen to him and watch him. And but really what he's warning about is not just the opportunity for squatters taking over homes. It is America. It's what he's talking about in the larger sense. Anybody can get in here under the Biden administration and engage in virtually any criminal conduct they want, and they get a pass.
So the pass they're getting, he's talking about even on Spanish language radio right in Los Angeles, they have people advertising that if you run out of money and you're here illegally, and your card only gets, let's say it's the $2,000 a month that you're getting from the CBP One app on the card that they give you at the border, you can leave the country and go back in and turn yourself in again, use a different name, and get another $2,500. And the person who was on the radio talking about it said, I've done this 3 or 4 times because whenever I need money, it's easier for me to just exit the country and come back in and turn myself in and get another $2,500. So he's doing this so he can make it. Los Angeles, obviously extremely expensive. Like it's not just a place you just fall into and make a good living there. So he's in the country illegally, and he's milking and bilking the U.S. taxpayers. And all of this happens at the behest of the Biden administration because they're the ones who are allowing it.
Yeah. And look at a place like New York. So a very dear friend of mine, a guy I've known for like 40 years, is a very senior law enforcement official in the city of New York. I'm not going to say they like DC. They have a number of different police departments in the city of New York. He's not in NYPD. He's in one of the smaller ones. Anyway, he has reason to interact with all sorts of charming newcomers, if you use the Biden administration lingo, in the city of New York. And he tells me nightmare stories of what they are faced with when it comes to this really tidal wave of people entering New York City. And of course, they're subsidizing it, or they're encouraging it, because Eric Adams and his administration are giving them $10,000 a pop. And why wouldn't you go? If you're going to get essentially credit cards or debit cards with $10,000 of value, plus free housing, free healthcare, free education, they are closing New York City schools and putting kids back on COVID era, Zoom remote learning, so that they can take the schools and turn them into illegal immigrant housing and, community centers. And my dear friend is overseeing a lot of this, and he doesn't have much hair left anyway, but whatever little he has is really coming out of his head. It's a nightmare scenario.
Mm, it is. And I think the most important thing about all of this is that it doesn't have to happen. And so it dovetails in with the new spending package. I woke up this morning, Chris, to notifications on my phone that Congress has, passed a spending package to avert a government shutdown. And they keep terming it that way because the government shutdown has become anathema. We couldn't possibly have a government shutdown. But why not shut the government down? If we fund the government right now, we're funding the movement of illegal aliens across the country. We're funding the debit cards you're talking about. We're funding the CBP1 app. We're funding the destruction of this country. We're funding more squatters to take over your home, or maybe it's not your home. Maybe it's the bank that holds the house in foreclosure, because there's a record number of foreclosures going on across the country right now, totally unreported in corporate media.
Correct.
I saw a story about it last night, Chris, and I was just drifting off to sleep. And why did I pick up the phone when I heard that notification? The notification was nothing. It was like, I should never have touched it. I touch it for the notification, open it up. My finger navigates over to X, and I see a story about foreclosures. I'm like, I haven't even thought about foreclosures in ages with the interest rates being so high. I've only been thinking about how hard it is to buy a home. And then I read the story, and they point out the areas of the country where the foreclosures are the highest. And so I'm always split on that. The first thing I think is, wow, that's awful, losing the home. And then I think, wow, some investors are really going to make a mint, because banks do fire sales on foreclosed homes. They just want to get out whatever they have left in it, right? They just want to break even. They don't usually try to make money on them. So investors can go in and buy great houses that need just surface work and then put them on the market and sell them or hold them for rental. And that's usually what people do when inflation is high and interest rates are high. Investors have set aside money for time periods like this where they can go in and do a little bit of real estate and, make some money on those kinds of transactions. It's actually very smart to do. But it is a function of the wreckage of a family's life when they have been foreclosed on. Investors will make money off of that because this is just the way it is. But it's all because of Biden.
And banks hate, like as you've said, banks hate being landlords. They're not interested in that. So they want to move those properties. Those home foreclosures that are spiking, not quite at the rate that we saw, at sort of the blowout of 2008, but nonetheless at a very high rate, is also joined with commercial real estate collapse. I can tell you that in lovely Washington, D.C., even with the federal government ordering people back into their offices, they're not going back in. The vacancy rate is extraordinary, and they're trying to repurpose buildings that, used to hold K Street consultancies and law firms that are now sitting empty. And so, we may have a situation with these high interest rates, with really a wobbly economy that's riding on a bubble, with home foreclosures and then the coming commercial real estate collapse. We are in very dangerous times. And when you think that, Joe Biden is the man with his hand on the tiller or on the wheel, Lord help us. Back to the original opening remark, though, on the dollars and cents aspect of this from the government budget point of view. What's so bad about a government shutdown? Well, why not? If a government shutdown means the border closes, hooray. If a government shutdown means Jack Smith no longer has money to engage in, the lawfare campaign against Trump, why not? I mean, I don't know why, and I also don't know why in this budgetary game that we're involved in, why the stupid party, the Republicans, don't say, you know what, we're going to exert a little leverage. We know that you were all terrified of a government shutdown, how horrible that would be. Well, we're going to apply pressure. We're going to say, we'll fund one of your, Stalinist programs that you love, with, giveaways to whatever group is your favorite one. But we're not going to fund, X, Y, or Z. We're not going to fund the CBP app. We're not going to fund Jack Smith's office. There's got to be some give and take. But instead, Speaker Johnson ends up looking a lot like Nancy Pelosi.
Mm,
And I never thought I'd say that, but that's the net result, right?
it
It's to
is.
go along to get along. And I get that part of them are terrified of having a shutdown because they think that it would be hung around their necks and used as a weapon come November. But I also think a lot of Americans would applaud, would encourage them to play hardball, to be rough about it, and actually show some guts and say, no, we're not going to continue to finance our demise. We're just not going to do it.
Yeah. So I think, well, first of all, yes, Americans would applaud the shutdown if it stopped the open border policies. Every single American who has a neighborhood that's full of illegal migrants that they just don't know what to do. We had Ryan, he's a Ohio State superintendent, Ryan Walters. He joined us and he said in Ohio, in tiny rural towns, Americans are waking up in a tiny rural town with no extra, so a town that has every house has a person living in it, right? Every house has a family living in it. Every business has, people working there. They don't have an unemployment rate. These are just tiny little rural areas. They wake up one morning and there are 100 illegal aliens just standing around, sitting down, laying down, whatever. These people then approach them, sometimes come knock on their door. I'm hungry. I need somewhere to live. And these people are like, where did you come from? We arrived last night. They're just shunting people into wherever they'll fit. Like America is a storage unit, and you just put furniture in until it's full. Then you go to the next unit and put furniture in. Only these are human beings. So these rural towns are like trying to find somewhere to put. You have to take a church gym or the gym at the school. Your kids are supposed to be in there doing soccer practice, and instead there's 100 migrants living in the gym. They showed up last night. If you shut the government down to stop that, you're going to find people across the country, everyone who's being touched by this crisis, the hospitals that now have multi-billion-dollar bills unpaid because they're serving migrants and these people are not paying. They're never going to pay. All of these businesses, everyone would applaud.
And that's what you just described used to be the crisis in border towns or in towns, 50 miles from the border. Where all of a sudden they'd wake up and there's, 50 people, a busload, hanging out in the town park across from the city hall or whatever. And the local town would kind of surge and they'd get people together and a church group or civic group would respond and find something. But those days are over where that was just a Texas and an Arizona problem. Like you said, this is now in middle America. Small towns, all of a sudden, one or two busloads are dropped off in the middle of nowhere at 2:00 in the morning, and the bus pulls away, and these people are on the streets. And how do you respond? What do you do? Or writ large, that's the case, in New York City, where they've basically imported an entire additional borough of the city of New York, and these people are out wandering around on the streets. They got to be put somewhere. Someone's got to feed them. Someone's got to clothe them. Someone's got to house them. And if the answer is, I look at it this way. I was talking to a colleague in Argentina, and I was asking them about the challenges that President Milei faces down in Argentina. Because here's a guy who's has to come in and fix basically 100 years of socialism. And he refers to himself as an anarcho-capitalist, right? He's a very libertarian guy with cultural conservatism, but economically a libertarian. He's an economics professor. And if you've seen pictures of him, he's kind of a wild-looking dude. But he's he wants to break the furniture and flip over some tables and really make some big reforms in Argentina, where they have outrageous inflation. So I said, how does Milei do this? Because he's going to inflict pain, right? The average Argentinian, when he puts in his economic reforms, initially, there's going to be hell to pay. It's going to be wickedly hard to reverse the inflationary pressures they're facing and get the government back up on its feet. I said, how does he do that and still keep public support? And the interviewee, the person I was talking to, very smart, says, hey, look, the average person is not stupid. They know what the position we're in. They see the prices in the stores. They know their money is becoming literally worthless in very short periods of time because, $100, rhetorically speaking now, $100 3 days later isn't worth 20. That's the level of inflation they're facing. He said, but they get it. They're not stupid. They understand it. So maybe, I'm agreeing with you, maybe if we actually did have a shutdown, the American people would say, good, finally, somebody closed the checkbook. Somebody cut up the credit card and said, enough. We're not going to keep doing this. Maybe there's enough sense to see through it, and the American public would get it and say, okay, we're going to stop the spending. When November rolls around, we're going to put Trump back in, and we're going to just simply do a 180 from where we're going right now.
And so, yes, and yes. Now, when you talk about Milei, and obviously they're further down the Primrose path they had full and out socialism for a very long time. But I gotta say, anytime we try to fix something, it's painful. Right. Hugh Ross is a physicist and PhD and actual rocket scientist. And he actually came to our church many, many times. But one of the times he came, he talked about the effect of sin. And he said in the Bible, it says over and over and over again that when you sin, you not only sow into death, but you create more work for yourself. And he gave a lot of examples of, if you don't clean up for a while, right? You just use a simplest example in your home. If you don't clean up for a while, you can wait and clean up later, right? If you wait a week and do all of the cleaning, it's not actually going to be that different than if you cleaned a little bit every day. But if you wait a month and try to clean your home, that will take you longer than one day to clean up the entire home to the way it was, when you stopped cleaning. And he compared it to like anything that you have, things that you are supposed to do and you don't do them. Obviously, procrastination and refusal to take advantage of the time that you have and work within a timely fashion, that is a sin. And so it's the same thing with societies, with, anything that you mess up, like importing 10 million people or allowing them to enter illegally. The cleanup from that is going to be costly and it's going to be painful. And people who are taking advantage of that new scenario, cheap labor, people who are willing to do almost anything for food, the sex trafficking, all the different attendant things that are coming out of that original sinful act of allowing these people in illegally for their votes will take something to clean up. And there will be people who experience the pain at a deeper level. When you say the shutdown, it's kind of a misnomer, isn't it, Chris? The shutdown isn't really all of government shutting down. Wouldn't that be great? No, it's just, some things, not the essential things. The essential things are shutdown proof. So, which is why I don't understand why the Republicans fear it so much, because they could easily weather a shutdown by simply saying it's shut down until the Democrats negotiate with us on this open border. And don't say anything else. Don't stand up there and allow them to say, why are you a racist? Why do you beat your mom? Why do you hate women? Why do you hate yourself? Why do you hate Americans? Whatever the thing is they're accusing you of. Why are you a racist, white supremacist, Bible thumper? Instead of answering all those, you just go to the podium and you say the government is shut down until the Democrats stop allowing the border to be wide open. We are defunding the border being wide open, and walk away from the podium. They would lose their minds. Their hair would be on fire, but they would have no clips of Republicans looking mealy-mouthed and afraid in front of the podiums, answering questions from them where they demand that you open up the government like they have a right to it. We don't have a right to the government we have right now because it's breaking the law.
It's compounding, like you said, the sin parallel. It is compounding and it only gets worse. And I agree with you that the very best thing they could do is exactly the scenario you describe, because it focuses the pressure on what would be stroke of the pen corrections on the part of Biden. He could simply reverse his reversal of what Trump had done to reinstitute control of the southern border. And, making it a single issue shutdown like that. And like you said, it isn't really a shutdown. It's simply, it's actually stopping hemorrhaging. We are at a point now where we are barely able to service the interest on our debt. That's how out of control, that's how insane our national debt is. We're barely able to service the interest. So, there's another parallel besides sin. You could think of it also that there's a parallel when it comes to people who are struggling with drugs and alcohol. You have to hit a
Mm-hmm.
bottom. It has to get as bad as it gets until finally there's a pain threshold met where people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they say, you know what? Can't do it anymore. Can't keep doing it. Got to find some other way. What is it going to take? What are you going to do? And only then, in the most desperate, situation or moment, is the person willing to say, you know what? I got to turn this around. I can't keep doing this. It's crazy, right? And only then is there real change. And before that, there's all kinds of double talk and rationalization and excuses and yeah, but, and oh, gee, next time I won't. And it's like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football, right? Oh, this time, don't worry, it'll be okay.
Right.
It goes on and on. But, you don't want it to get to a crisis point. You don't want it to be something that is, jarringly, I don't know, psychologically scarring or whatever. But then what are you going to do? I mean, how long, how bad does it have to get?
Well, I think I think they're, so I go back to the Bible again real quickly. So you can refuse to acknowledge the truth, and you can do so for such a long time that you actually end up becoming immune to it. The Bible speaks to this in numerous places where you refuse the truth and you do so for such a long time that you're turned over to the sin and the wickedness. So a lot of what we're seeing right now where people are complaining about illegal immigration, but then saying, but I'm voting for Biden because he's not a racist. That is them being unable to absorb the truth. The truth is it's their fault that we have a wide open border because they voted for Biden. They don't want the fault. They don't want the blame, nor do they want the solution, which is to vote Biden out so that the border can be closed. And so they're deceived and they're useless for anything except more destruction. And I feel like this is a hard place for us to be, Chris, for us to accept that it's not maybe 1 or 2% of Americans who have their brains broken in this way. It's tens of millions of Americans whose brains are literally broken and unable to absorb the truth. But we'll have to have the difficult moments like what Mele is going through in his country as he sets it to right. We're going to still have to deliver that medicine to the sick patient and bring about the healing, even if that sick patient has to be strapped down to the bed and it has to go IV instead of, through the mouth. We're going to have to do it. And that's where we are.
The danger, the problem that we face is that we have such an incredibly sharp ideological, and it's really ideological divide in the country. I was doing some reading and some studying because I have a bright idea for a project I'm working on. And I was looking at the history of the Spanish Civil War, which most people have no interest, no regard or anything else for it. But the Spanish Civil War has a lot of characteristics in it that show the really sharp, vicious divide in a particular society. And it was one that on one side was influenced very, very, very strongly by the communists, and on the other side by a much more traditional conservative government that was also strongly aligned in the case of the Spaniards with the Catholic Church. But the two different sides had one very consistent sort of theme, and that is that they went from being adversarial to being at a point where they were so entrenched in their positions, so divided, so committed to their sides that they ended up seeking the eradication of the other side. And that led itself to insane amounts of abuse and craziness and show trials and mass executions. Look, this is a very well-educated, highly civilized, highly cultured society. Spain of the 20th century is not some primitive backwater third world developing country. These are very well educated, smart, intelligent, prosperous people, but they resorted to a political environment and a battle between these two sides that was it was more vicious than the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union, in the new Soviet Union coming out of Tsarist Russia. More violent, more vicious than that. And the only thing that eclipsed it, frankly, was the brutality of the Second World War. But that was an international war versus an intra-national civil war. So one society, one culture, one people, one history, but they split and divided in such a vicious, angry, militant way that they were slaughtering each other. I mean, we've already been through that once with 600,000 Americans dead in our Civil War. But I look at the current circumstances, and there are people that if you can just say the word Trump and they will start to vibrate and shake and spit and spin. I mean, it is a crazy, crazy situation we're in. And I mean, to me, if people think that the next election is stolen, I think we're in for some very, very dangerous times in this country. All I can say is it better not be, right? Everyone has to be out and motivated and active and in promoting and encouraging and participating in this election in a very transparent, lawful way. They need to be involved, whether they're poll watchers or they're participants in the electoral process or they're supporting people that are. But people have got to have faith and confidence that the next election is complete, fair, transparent, open, and not some gimmick or some game, because that's the kind of thing that will be really corrosive and tear at the fabric of the country.
Yep, and it puts us many steps closer to a civil war, which the left always says they don't want, but then they, import 10 million illegals, most of them military-age fighting men. They destroy the norms. Right now you have the AG of New York moving to seize the Westchester golf course. What? For a bond that the president should be allowed to defer until his appeals process has been completed. It's not as if New York is on the verge of bankruptcy and they need the money from the judgment from Trump to stay afloat. It's
nothing precludes the Supreme Court of the United States from intervening. Let's be clear about this. There's other instances in our history where when there has been some outrageously heavy-handed move on the part of a prosecutor or a court, where the Supreme Court, and the legal term, got to always throw a little Latin in there, sua sponte, the court on its own volition, of its own power and idea, can insert itself and say, you know what, we're watching an abusive process here that is beyond the pale. This is not like any other legal process against any other defendant in any other case anywhere. And that's true when it comes to the Trump prosecution over in the New York case with Letitia James. And they can insert themselves. They can say, you know what, in this case, we're going to allow the appellate process to go on, but this bond requirement that was manufactured out of thin air, that no one else in the history of New York has ever had to post a bond like, they could choose to insert themselves and not put their finger on the scale when it comes to the outcome of the trial itself, but just say, look, this manufactured artificial bail threshold that no one else in the history of the country has ever had to pay, we think this is ridiculous. So like any other bond, you'll put up a percentage, but not the full face value of the judgment entered against you. And I mean, Justice Roberts, call your office, right? I mean, somebody there needs to kind of wake up and on their own volition, they're watching a miscarriage of justice and they're choosing not to act, and there's no good reason for it.
But sometimes they have to be shamed into things. And I'm thinking of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in this instance, because I believe there may be some will to do what you're discussing, Chris, within the other members, but you would need the Chief Justice of the court to, I guess, initiate a process like this. And the Chief Justice is too busy trying to be a swing voter and, exert the kind of historical power of being in on every single consequential ruling than he is in righting wrongs. Because the situation in New York City, the state of New York, quite honestly, is very tenuous right now with the business atmosphere, because businesses are now looking and saying, well, we've engaged in the same kind of real estate transactions that he did. We've paid our loans off, but there's no reason why Letitia James couldn't come after us. We're not on the left. We're just apolitical, but we're definitely not Democrats. And so a lot of businesses are trying to decide, should we stay here? Do we move to another state? Other businesses that would be there are not, they're not going to be there because they're going to have to make changes in light of this new reality. Because Democrats always say, well, it's just him because he's a threat to democracy and he's an enemy of our country. But the fact is, any person they disagree with wears those same labels. Any company that is operating
just think of the shakedown.
Yeah.
Think of the shakedown opportunities. A guy walks up to you and says, hey, I'm thinking of running for commissioner of X, Y, and Z. Would you really be interested in supporting my campaign? If you own a business in New York, how do you dare tell the guy no? Right?
It's a new world.
If the guy gets into office and you're running a small business, all of a sudden you're going to have every code inspector, fire marshal, health inspector in the entire state descend upon your business. I mean, there's other instances of this happening. You'll remember Obama used the IRS against 501c3 groups. It was the entire Tea Party movement, right? People that went out and wanted to create patriot groups, the entire Tea Party movement itself, anybody who got involved in that movement, and they filed a 501c3 application to be a nonprofit entity, they faced Lois Lerner. And everyone kind of forgets this. But this was an intimidation tactic. This was a shakedown effort on the part of Obama's highly politicized IRS to go out and pressure people. And you found people that had organized very effective citizens' grassroots groups, and they also happened to have a small business, let's say. All of a sudden, every agency, every alphabet soup agency at the state, local level, federal level in some cases, suddenly they had inspectors. Suddenly they had a code violation. Suddenly they had, you can't do that in your parking lot. You need to have a new, waiver granted for the zoning commission. They all were picked apart, nickeled and dimed, because they dared to be activists. And that is the message that the state of New York is sending to anybody who's got a business. You better play ball if you know what's good for you. Otherwise, you don't support the right people, you might have a problem. You might have an enforcement action brought against you. Because,
and you know what, Chris?
You have 3 trash cans instead of 2.
Yeah, they've gotten that message, and we're going to see change in New York because of it, a lower expectation of good business atmosphere. I hear the music, which means we're done, but we're never done talking to Chris Farrell. He does amazing things at judicialwatch.org. You got to follow him everywhere there. And we have more Stacy on the right on the other side. Thank you, Chris. Good to talk to you tonight. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.